Is this thing on?
I think they can hear us a bit better now. Do you think they are ready to change the status quo?
It's one thing to get them listening, but now let's get them to act.
You are now about to witness the strength of nursing knowledge.
Welcome to the Gritty Nurse Podcast, an unfiltered discussion on health and healthcare. My name is Sarah Fung.
My name is Amie Archibald-Varley, and we are your hosts. Our Toronto Star and the Globe and Mail national best-selling book is available now. Get your copy of The Wisdom of Nurses today. You can get a book for purchase at any of your local retailers like Indigo or Chapters, or pick up your book online through Amazon or other types of retailers. It's also available in various different formats like audiobook and on Kindle. If you read it and you loved it, please leave us a review.
Please make sure you subscribe on our YouTube channel where you can watch our podcast in video format. Like, share, and leave a review. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, or any other podcast platform, leave us a rating and review. Thank you to all our listeners and sponsors who continue to support us.
Your support makes our podcast possible, and we're grateful for the partnership and for you believing in our work here at the Gritty Nurse Podcast. Stay gritty. So hi and welcome to the Gritty Nurse Podcast, an unfiltered discussion related to health and healthcare. My name is Amie.
And my name is Sarah.
And we are your hosts. So of course, I am sounding wild. And I mean, this is just the way it has to be coming down to these last few episodes. But I am so excited for the guest that we have coming on. I've followed him across the country, literally stalking him while I have my own speaking engagements, because I think we've just kind of followed each other. And he's so dynamic and just such a breath of fresh air. And we're so happy to have this guest on. Sarah, who's coming on to the Gritty Nurse Podcast today?
We have a fellow millennial. I'm just going to put that out there right now. A fellow millennial, fellow speaker, fellow advocate. And we have none other than Hamza Khan, who is a best-selling author, award-winning entrepreneur, and world-renowned keynote speaker whose TEDx talk, Stop Managing, Start Leading, has been viewed over 2 million times. He challenges audiences and organizations to rehumanize their workplaces to achieve inclusive and sustainable growth. He is a visiting scholar, top-ranked university educator, and respected thought leader with actionable insights featured by the likes of Inc., Vice, and Business Insider. The world's leading organizations trust Khan to enhance modern leadership, inspire purposeful productivity, nurture lasting resilience, and navigate constant change. He has spoken on various global stages, including the World Youth Forum to TEDx, and works with clients such as Microsoft, PepsiCo, LinkedIn, Deloitte, Salesforce, TikTok, and hundreds of colleges and universities. Through his writing, speaking, teaching, and executive coaching, Khan empowers people to thrive in the future of work. Welcome to the Gritty Nurse Podcast.
Oh my God, I'm here. What an introduction. Thank you so much. I now appreciate why I need a bio. I need a bio because in my mind, I'm still 14 years old in constant awe of this adventure that has me, walking stages with y'all and signing books and, attempting to show up while navigating imposter syndrome and all of the different challenges and drawbacks of being shy, socially awkward, and introverted in a very public world. And so when you recited that bio, Sarah, I was like, okay, yes, finally. I'm not feeling as overwhelmed as I was just 30 seconds ago because I'm here with you too. My goodness, best-selling authors, bestsellers on the Toronto Star list, on the Globe and Mail. I mean, no big deal over there. Dynamic keynote speakers. The last couple of guests, I was telling my mom about this. I'm like, hey, guess what? You know who else was on this show? Jagmeet Singh, Prime Minister Trudeau. What the heck? I'm like, okay, thank you so much for that introduction. And thank you for your warmth and just generosity of time and spirit. I'm so excited to be here with y'all.
Yeah, I think it's funny when we have a guest where we're both in equal awe of each other, because I think the last time this happened was when we had Kathy Crowan, who is a fellow advocate and nurse. And it's just amazing the stuff that you've done. And it's nice to hear that you still suffer from the same kind of stuff that we do, because when we're out there signing books or we're going on media or, doing things like that, we still feel like what's happening? Like, are we actually
Yeah.
doing this? Because we didn't think 5 years ago when we started this journey that we would be where we are today. And it's so refreshing to hear you feel the same way.
Yeah, the
Thank you,
imposter
Sarah.
syndrome is real. Like, I think that's probably the biggest struggle that we have to get over to say that, although we are regular people, of course, we are regular people, we are
Yeah.
trying to do something and trying to change the world, just like you are, right? Through
Mhm.
conversation. But imposter syndrome, man, that's another episode altogether in
Oh,
terms
yeah.
of things that we could talk about.
Who
Yeah.
knows?
So
Down the
in
road, I might
preparation,
be able to
oh,
rival Nurse Matthews' count over here. I think Nurse Matthews 3 episodes in. That's the record to set here. So maybe down the road we could do this. I
For sure.
absolutely.
so
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah. That's awesome that you listen to that many episodes. And
I'm a legit
I
fan.
I actually checked out your TED talk. I listened twice, and I think that one of the things you very briefly mentioned in this TED talk was that you started in the army and
Yes.
you were in the armed forces. So I kind of want to know, how does one go from being in the armed forces to being a TEDx speaker, talking about things like burnout, PTSD, and mental health?
Oh my God, what a journey. Given how warm and flowery this introduction has been, and we've already gone deep. Within 5 minutes, we're talking about imposter syndrome. This is at some point, this is going to rival the Wicked press tour. We're all going to be crying by the end of this. Um, wow, I've never been asked that question. How did I go from the army to that? And let me attempt to the best of my ability to draw that connection between those two disparate worlds, if you will. Um, I joined the army out of protest. I was born to Indian immigrant parents, socioeconomically disenfranchised for most of their life, I would say. We grew up in priority neighborhoods, and my mom and dad, with the best of intentions, really just wanted me to not endure the same level of duress that they did growing up. And their answer to that was to fall into the career trinity of doctor, lawyer, engineer.
Yep,
Right.
And
I know that one well.
yeah, it's a real thing. And I had neither the stomach nor the aptitude, let alone the marks for any of those worlds. In fact, I was born in New York, where I'm recording this podcast from right now. And from a very young age, I was enthralled and enamored by the big lights, by all things show business. I'm a kid, an aging millennial. I grew up on wrestling, on the music videos of Hype
Yes.
Williams. It was sensory overload for me, and I found very quickly that I was creative. I was artistically inclined, and when I reached the precipice that is 17, when you're supposed to decide in Canada what you're supposed to do with the rest of your life, I was like, I'm going to become a movie director. What else am I supposed to do? I play Yu-Gi-Oh by day. I make movies by night. Let's just keep this going. And my dad wasn't having it. He's like, no, 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 hold on. You got to make a minimum $200,000 a year. How
What?
Right.
else are you going to buy a home and provide for your
Jeez.
family? And I was like, the math ain't mathing. I don't know about this. And I did not know how to protest or rebel against my parents. I was a very obedient, shy, meek kid, if you will. And so I rebelled in the best way that I knew how. I joined the Canadian Armed Forces. That was it. That was my motivation to do so.
Oh, I don't mean to laugh, but that
Yeah,
is
yeah.
that is that is wild. That is rebellion.
Oh
Yeah,
That
I
yeah.
thought
truly
As
I
an
mean,
is.
immigrant parents, yeah, that
I
is.
went through the array. I'm like, should I get a ring, a tattoo? Should I engage in some risky behavior? And I'm like, you know what? Let's just go nth degree over here. I'm, kind of galvanized by the visuals of 9/11, and I feel a deep sense of patriotism for my home country of the United States and where I'm living right now, where I'm raised in Canada. Let me do this. And both of my parents were disappointed. They were appalled. My mom was aghast by this decision. I mean, her child has now subjected himself to a machine that at some point, if it goes far enough, will be ingested into conflicts happening around the world.
Right.
And I did this, and I promise I'll wrap up the story quickly. I realize that I'm now waxing poetic a little bit
No,
over
no,
here,
we
but
want
I've
to
never
hear
been
it. We
asked this
want to
question,
hear
so
Yeah,
I'm
it.
we're
This
all
engaging
about
with
the
it
is
a little bit.
stories.
engaging.
Thank you. So I joined the military, and it started off as a reservist, and all of my summers, my evenings, my weekends, all major holidays belonged to the government, and I would go
Wow.
there. And what I quickly realized, Amy and Sarah, is that I have been following other people's blueprints. Up until that point, I was so at the behest of machinations, schemes, ideas that weren't my own. I was following voices, specifically my parents' voices, and I was acting against my own interest. I was, and not to use hyperbole here, but I felt like at times I was betraying who I really was on the inside. And that became very clear to me when I joined the military, and I realized, wow, that nobody else is responsible for me other than me. That was a feeling that was alive and well for me at the time. And I remember coming back home, and I left out a very interesting part, by the way. Sorry, let me just quickly go back over here. When
For
I say I
sure.
rebelled, it happened because I can't believe I'm about to say this. Mom, if you're listening to this, this really happened. So, um, before I joined the armed forces, there was a couple of months where I would actually skip school. I
A
had
couple
spares,
months,
and I
like
would.
entire months, or you
And
would skip.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, it started with weeks, and then I would sort of fudge the notes and I would intercept the calls that would come home.
Oh
And what I would
dear.
do is I would actually just stay at home and play video games with my delinquent friends. And I thought I was
Wow.
being slick for a very long time until one day, I heard the keys jangle inside the door, and I was like, "Whoa, it's 11 a.m. What's going on over here? Dad should be at work." And then my dad
Mm.
storms into the basement and sees me and all of my friends, and they scatter. They're like, "Oh my God!" They go hiding in the laundry room in the bathroom. And then my dad was like, "What is this? I didn't come halfway across the country, halfway across the world for you to, be over here wasting your life." And then I remember what really preceded me joining the military was he kicked my Xbox, and that was the last straw for me. I was like, "Dad, you know what? I'm gonna show you." He's like, "Yeah, you're a tough guy," and like it was just like we're just puffing out my scrawny little chest, and he's like, "Yeah, you know what? You're gonna amount to nothing at this rate." And I'm like, "You know what, Dad? I'll show you. I'm gonna join the
Yeah.
Canadian Armed Forces." Sorry, I wanted to add that little bit of color over there because it does seem quite dramatic to go from that to that. But yes, anyways, I come back home from my first summer in the military, and I remember just apologizing profusely to my dad. I'm like, "Hey, you know what? I'm sorry, pops. You had my best interest at heart. I was being a little shithead. My apologies for swearing, but
Oh
other
no.
No,
guests have
no,
done
you can
so.
swear
So
here.
Unfiltered.
It's all good.
okay, there we go. And then I remember apologizing to my dad, and I said, "You know what? I see the wisdom of the path that you've prescribed for me. I'm just going to go ahead and try to the best of my ability." So I half-assedly joined the University of Toronto Scarborough, a business and political science program, believing that I'm going to become a lawyer. And what became
Right.
very clear to me, Sarah and Amy, is that again, I did not have the stomach, the aptitude, nor the marks for any of this, and I
Right.
quickly slid from a B plus student to a C to a D at risk of dropping out. And here I am, lingering, languishing in my third year of university. My body language had completely changed. I was so disengaged. And I'm slumping through the student center, walking down a hallway on the top floor, a hallway that I've walked down probably thousands of times. And you know how they have those little cork boards that are advertising student events and
Yeah.
stuff?
Yeah.
There's one that I passed by, and I remember it so vividly. Um, and it made me stop for a fraction of a millisecond longer than I would have. And it was a poster that was so well designed, 11 by 17, great use of white space, typography, and color. And it said, "What's next?" It really just spoke
Mm.
to the subconscious idea that I've been entertaining and engaging with in that time in my undergrad. And it said, "What's next?" And it was advertising a leadership development program to help students discover what to do after they graduate. And so I had nothing else going on. I was clearly dejected. And so I attended this thing. And at the front of the room was a man by the name of Drew Dudley. Are you familiar with his TED Talk, TEDx Talk, the lollipop moment?
Nope.
Nope, we're gonna have
Tell
to
us
look
about
it
it.
up
Yeah.
though.
Would highly recommend. And his idea, just like Simon Sinek starts with why, is such a simple idea. And it's that sometimes when we're acting in ways that are positive and all about spreading love and light, even if it happens subconsciously, even if it happens accidentally, the ripple effects can be tremendous. Just
Mm.
acts of kindness, random acts of kindness, of surprise and delight can go such a long way. And he recounts a story where he, during orientation, gave two people who were standing in line a lollipop and introduced them to each other. And they ended up getting married years later. And
Oh.
so that was the story that he told. And his lollipop moment for me was he stood at the front of this room and he said, "You don't just go to college or university to get a job. You don't just go to college or university to get a degree or a diploma. You go there to grow up. You go there to subject yourself to the crucible of citizenship, to expand
Right.
yourself personally, professionally, and academically, to become a whole person." And that's when my jaw dropped. I was like, I cannot
Mm.
believe this. This is why I should have been here in the first place, not just to follow through on my parents' blueprint to become a doctor, lawyer, engineer. This was really an exercise in self-expression. And so in the third year of my university, right before fourth, TSN turning point, I dropped out of business and political science. I switched all of my credits over to English literature. And I became hyper engaged. When I started doing what I love doing, the marks went from F's and D's to A pluses. I mean, don't ask me what my CGPA was, but my
You
GPA in
threw
my
it up.
fourth year, 4.0s across the board.
Wow.
And I made up for lost time. I joined every organization that I could. I started organizations, I did internships, I started side hustles, hyper engaged. And how that inevitably led to the place where I'm at right now is through that experience of seeing how impactful one message at the right time for the right audience could be. It changed the trajectory of my life. Subconsciously, it planted a seed in me that has been germinating and blossoming for the last 15 years. And that has been opportunities like this, even though you and I are exchanging stories that we might have shared across the country with tens of thousands of people that we've written about in our respective books. There's somebody listening to this for the first time that needs to hear this. And hopefully
Mhm.
for them, this is a lollipop moment that will 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 spread a lot of joy.
Wow. I mean, you said that you've never asked this question before. We've never received such a thoughtful, well, well thought out response before. And this was totally on the spot that we put you on. But that was a really
Yeah,
powerful
what a
message.
story. And I
Yeah.
think that like I think we actually had a speaking engagement yesterday and talking about like that everybody has a story, everybody has a journey that they go on. And some people don't feel that they have any knowledge or experience that they can share with someone that can transform or change the way that they might go about doing something. And I think there's so much there like that I could even connect with, like in terms of my childhood, not knowing what my identity was, or you went into an army, like going into the army where you would have no identity. Your identity would be that, and recognizing within yourself is like, this is
Yeah.
not what I want. And I think a lot of us go into roles or jobs that don't represent who we are internally, right?
No.
There's that huge struggle.
Mhm.
So I think, just like you said, that maybe that story, or even having this conversation, will be that lollipop moment for someone. Like, I hope so, because that's why we continue to do this. And thank you for sharing that. And I think I think of the days that I skipped school too. Hopefully, my mom. I'm sure she knows. She definitely
The
knew, because
story
I
ended
mean,
well, though. Yeah.
yeah, the end result was great.
Yeah.
But I mean, at the end of the day, I think it's for, even for us, hearing that and knowing that at the end of the day that we do these things because we're searching for something, right? We're
Mhm.
searching for something bigger. Maybe we're bored too, right?
Hmm.
That at the end of the day, we will find what we want as long as we continue to look for it. I think that's it, that inquiry
Mhm.
and wanting to learn more about yourself, which is
Yeah.
really powerful. So thank you for sharing that.
My pleasure. And they call it the war machine for a reason. And if you ask any activist, they will all tell you in their own way that the real problem that's the system level determinant at the highest possible level that's making life miserable for people who are experiencing dehumanization in any environment is industrialization. It's the massification of anything. And for me, that was the military. And I went there, and to your point, Amy, I was dehumanized where I didn't have a name anymore. I was
Right.
rendered obsolete. I became faceless. I've forgotten every phone number other than my own and my partner's phone number, but there's another number I remember, D63029-129, and that was the
Yep.
ID that was given to me, and that became my identity for several years of my life. And I love that you said that so much of us, so like what we're really trying to do here at any level is just trying to articulate ourselves, to find purpose, to reconnect with something transcendent. And the suppression that I felt in the military galvanized me to have that transformative experience with Drew Dudley. I don't think I would have been ready to receive that message had I not gone through that process of depersonalization that
Right.
spread over several years. So I
Mhm.
love that, and if I may just quickly turn that back over to you, what the two of you are doing over here is so revolutionary because you are giving a voice to a community that I'm not going to say has been voiceless, but especially in the last 4 years, has been dehumanized. And so, thank you for putting into words and for humanizing a group of people that are so integral to everybody's lives over here. My sister is a nurse. I'm not sure if you knew this coming into the
No, I
No,
didn't
no,
podcast.
I
know
didn't know
that.
that.
Yeah, she's at Sick Kids. Shout out to Nazia. I'm going to turn her on to this podcast. She's going to be such a huge fan of this.
Amazing.
She works in palliative care, and I remember, I got to experience the journey of her becoming a nurse, and like any sibling relationship, there's a lot of trolling, a lot of jockeying for position,
Right.
but I love her deeply, and I know the episode I'm going to turn her on to first, which is the Halloween ghost story episode. She's got
Definitely.
Nice,
some ghost
nice.
stories, and if we have some time, man, I would love to share just a little teaser. But sorry, I
Oh,
digress.
we
I just
could
wanted to
have
say
you come
thank you for
on
doing
next
this.
year. We could talk ghost stories
Oh,
for
that'd be
Oh
sure.
man.
amazing. Yeah, and one thing I wanted to add is that, you mentioned that the army reduced you to a number. I think in nursing, seniority is so huge, right? So we're not very focused on, and I'm just going to make a blanket statement here.
Please.
We're not very focused on outcomes, but it's very seniority based. So I remember when I first started nursing, I would look constantly at where I was on the seniority list. And it's like, oh, I made it from page 7 to page 5. But guess what? The person at number 1 started in 1975. And how will I ever get there?
Yeah.
And that's part of the reason why I decided I need to create my own path. And I think that's something that we
Yes.
all did to get to where we are right now, is that we knew what was expected of us, but we decided to take a risk and branch out and carve our own path, something that gave us more fulfillment in life.
And what a path you both have carved. I mean, truly trailblazers. I can say this as a fellow author and speaker. This shit ain't easy, man.
No, it's not.
This is so incredibly hard. And depending on the subject matter we speak about too, I mean, there's re-traumatization that happens. I speak about dehumanizing work conditions and, I speak about leadership, specifically bad leadership. And every time I get up on stage, I'm just re-engaging with times that bad bosses have subjected me to feelings that have brought me beyond the brink of burnout. So thank you for modeling at the highest possible level what could happen if nurses and anybody, any healthcare practitioners, really anybody chooses to find their voice, follow their instinct, and express themselves at the highest level. It's inspiring me truly.
Oh my goodness. I don't even know what to say to that. I'm like, oh my gosh,
This
I'm
is it.
shook.
The Wicked Press Tour
uh,
continues.
yeah, like I mean, I think like what you said in terms of being dehumanized. Sarah and
Yeah.
I have talked like extensively about why we started the podcast. Right? We started the podcast. It was a passion project. We were broken when we
Yeah.
started the podcast. We both had left our respective positions. I left with no prospects, no job lined up due to the toxicity within our workplace, and we felt that we weren't being listened to. We didn't know if we would ever have an opportunity where people would listen to us. And we're like, you know what? We don't have to wait to share our story. We don't have to
No.
wait to
And we
share
don't need to
our
ask
experiences.
permission,
And we don't
right?
have to ask permission. So we're just like, microphone, camera, our voices, and that's it. And
Wow.
our hope was that when we shared our stories, knowing other people maybe would listen, that they would never feel alone, right? We wanted to know that one, we weren't alone, and that if other people were experiencing the same things we were within our workplaces, that they wouldn't be alone too. So thank you for recognizing that within our stories and our experiences and showing, and appreciating us, because sometimes we don't get that, right?
Yeah.
It's kind of weird. Like we do hear people saying thank you, but not often like that. So we truly appreciate that.
Of
I'm
course.
going to take this to another little question, because you talked a little bit about industries and really the humdrum, particularly within healthcare and probably in various different industries that you speak to, of like this kind of monotony, working like in a drum in a sphere, like working in factories. It really resonated with us. How can we move past pushing, feeling like we're pushing, or punching a clock? Because a lot of times it feels like we're just a number. We're going in, we got to check the box, and we got to leave because we're so exhausted. What are some things that you'd have to say on that?
Wow. Yeah, let me just continue to follow the instinct and the framing of this podcast, starting with a very strong hip hop refrain about fighting the powers. Let's just talk about it, right? So,
Yeah.
um, Dr. Christina Maslach is considered a pioneering researcher. I would even describe her as the godmother of burnout. And
Mm.
she has my all-time favorite quote about workplaces. She says workplaces can be very what's the specific word? Workplaces can be very, I think it's like toxic environments, or she uses dehumanizing environments. And then she goes on to say that if you take a plant and put it in a pot and give it lousy soil and not enough sun, I don't care how gorgeous the plant was to begin with, it isn't going to thrive. And
Right.
this is coming from somebody who entered burnout into the lexicon, and then whose research moved away from individual solutions to looking at upstream systemic factors, specifically fairness, values, community, workload, reward, and compensation. And when she describes the workplace in those terms, it gives us permission to then engage with a lot of the harrowing stats that come across our LinkedIn feeds, that we may get in
Right.
emails, that we may see at conferences. And sometimes these stats are so big that they don't register. There has to be some sort of um, cognitive bias that prevents us from really engaging with them. But the one that I think about all the time, almost, at least once a day, is Gallup's State of the Workplace report. It's the largest of its kind. It's nearly 3 million employees over 10 years. And what they found is only a measly 15% of employees are engaged at work. Not
Right.
soon to be
Really?
married, but involved, enthusiastic, and committed. And you listen to that stat and you're like, wow, that's a really low number. But then you have to just ask yourself, hold on, does that mean that 85% of employees are disengaged? So if only 15% are engaged, by my math, that's 85% who are
Right.
disengaged. I mean, if there was an 85% chance that by crossing the street you'd get hit by a car, nobody's ever crossing the street again. But yet
Right.
people are going
Mhm.
into workplaces and logging onto virtual workspaces that are making them sick, injured, or worse.
Right.
And I then took the liberty of like looking at the individual user level data and looking at the specific language that was used in these reports. And you start to find things like miserable, suffering, struggling, surviving. You then start to see that these sentiments are expressed mostly by women of color, by single mothers, by Gen Z, by frontline workers. And, your mind goes to the place of what is this status quo that we are upholding here? And I love that,
Right.
Sarah, in the introduction, you directly address the status quo. And I don't think that we, in our day to day, have the permission space to zoom out and contend with the system level factors that are making misery a reality for everyone. So, how do we address that? Well, then we have to look at the other stat that was the counterbalance to my experiencing and then researching burnout, which is leadership. And so the two sort of realms, the two towers, if you will, that compose my thinking, working, doing are leadership and burnout. And there is a direct overlap between the two of them because when you consider that 70%, conservatively, according to Gallup, 70% of the variance in employee engagement scores fall within the purview of leadership, then you start to ask the right questions. Then you start to say, why are leaders unable to engage their employees? When this is a $200 billion a year industry, leadership development, conferences, books, online courses, workshops, so on and so forth, why is that producing a deficit every year of $9 trillion in global GDP? Why are people disengaged? Why are they miserable? Why are they burning out? Why are they taking sick days? Why are those numbers increasing exponentially? So what do we need to do? I think that we have to, number one, and you know what? I'm not even going to give a number two. This is the most elegant solution that I can recommend. We need to stop prescribing individual solutions to what is clearly a system level problem. We can't yoga
Mhm.
our way out of burnout. We can't drink
Right.
green
Mhm. Yeah.
smoothies and get back to normal. We actually have to be asking the questions of our bosses, of our CEOs, of our chair people, of our elected officials. And I love that this is being modeled by the podcast. I mean, you both, in a very compassionate way, held our prime minister. You held his feet to the fire. You asked him some very difficult questions. It was done so with grace, with compassion, with humility. But for those people who were listening between the lines, you were really asking some tough questions that I don't think he's even been asked in Parliament. And this is
Mhm.
exactly what we need to start doing. We need to start demanding change from above because the groundswell, we have done everything in our power to heal, to come back to center, but we can't. I think what we're experiencing now is not burnout. I think, Sarah, in a previous episode, you used the term moral distress. I would take it a step
Mhm.
further, or not even a step further. Adjacent to that is moral injury. I
Yeah.
think that's what burnout is. If we start classifying burnout as moral injury, suddenly we can start seeing the problem the way it should be seen.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you touched on a lot of important points here. And really, the reason that we started the podcast was to give people voice, right? And we felt for a long time we were voiceless. And I have felt for a long time that there is a lot of fear, a lot of silencing in nursing to where people that do speak out are punished, really. And it's a shame because we have so much wisdom, we have so much knowledge, as we mentioned in our book, that just people don't recognize us for. And a lot of times people are asking doctors for their opinion. And I have so much respect for doctors. I just think people should be asking nurses as well.
Yeah. 100%.
Yeah. The wisdom of
So,
nurses is the real thing.
yeah,
It truly is. I mean, I
yeah.
think about, several nurses come to mind, but yeah, anyways, I digress.
Yeah, so I just wanted to switch gears a bit because in your talk, you mentioned something called the management paradox, where organizations need management, but at the same time, people don't like to be managed. So, can you tell us a little bit about this theory that you mentioned?
Yeah, and it's not an original theory by any means. I'm synthesizing the wisdom of leadership thinkers before me, and we think about sort of distinct industrial revolutions that preceded the current moment, but I would even describe them at a more lower resolution. We went from an agricultural economy to an industrial economy, from an industrial economy to a knowledge economy, and where we are at the time of this recording is we are transitioning with the help of AI into a wisdom economy.
Right.
One thing that has changed throughout the first two economies, the agricultural and the industrial, was that labor relations between the owners of production, between the government, between the capitalist, was actually hostile. And I don't use that word lightly. When you just consider that in 19, I'm going to get my years wrong over here. I think 1883 and 1876. I'm going to come back to this over here. I should have
You
written
know,
this down over here because I'm trying to create a timeline over here for just when dehumanization was prevalent in North America and when the first sweeping reforms were proposed that reduced the working day from 10 hours to 8 hours, that outlawed child slavery. I mean, this was all fairly recent, in some cases, barely one human being ago. So against the backdrop of that idea, what happened in the industrial and agricultural revolutions is that people were working in dehumanizing conditions in which they didn't want to work, but they were forced to work. And so management as a process was created to produce productivity at scale. We had to create systems, we had to create standards. This was accelerated by a person. Um, I'm blanking on his name right now, but working very close with Henry Ford. It'll come back to me.
you know,
It'll come
Reese,
back to me. I think it was, I don't know why I'm blanking on this. I literally talk about this all the time and I research this, but his whole idea was that there's only one best way to get something done.
right,
And that process was then applied to a group of workers who represented a cornucopia of backgrounds, perspectives, and experiences. Fast forward to the current moment, and I think that we have come back from the pandemic. We've come back from March of 2020 with a different worth it equation that values time, that values family, that values purpose, just as equally, if not more, than work itself. We are an unmanageable generation. We don't respond well to the command and controlled, authoritarian, top
right,
down, boot on your neck
Mhm.
style of management. What
right.
we actually need is inspiration, a more human touch. We need galvanizing. We need leadership. And that is the paradox because organizations still require a level of productivity. We still require things to get done. You think about a hospital. Hospitals still have hard metrics in terms
Right.
of patients, beds, improved health outcomes, so on and so forth. And if people are given the right conditions to do work and they can subscribe to a management structure, then sure, in that moment, they can technically be managed. But I actually think they're being led. We manage things. Things like
Right.
budgets, processes, events, those are things that need to be managed, but people need to be led. Anything less than that, in my opinion, I take a very hard line stance on this, is dehumanizing. So
You
that's the
know,
management paradox in a nutshell.
something about that just resonates with me. I just like one of the things is like I say this to my husband, and I don't want people to take this the wrong way. Is I really don't like being told what to do. I don't know if that resonates at all. It's
Mhm.
like
Mhm.
I
Mhm.
think there's a way to get people motivated to do things, but telling people, forcing people, it's just never sat well with me. So whenever I was in an environment where someone was like putting their foot on my neck and be like, this is how it should be done. It didn't work for me because at the end of the day, I come to the table with knowledge, skills, and judgment, and I should be able to use those. Like I'm an adult. Treat me like an adult while I'm in this. Like you hired me to do a job, so
Mhm.
treat
Right.
me like an adult so I can do the work that you've hired me for. You made this long list of things that you want. Give me the ability to do those things, and you're 100% like nobody wants to be managed or micromanaged or any of that kind of stuff. And I do like the other piece where it's like times are changing, and I think that's a good thing. This whole idea behind when COVID kind of came in and we had to move to these types of remote workplaces, people had to evolve and move quickly, and the productivity was still there. And it's just crazy how
Mhm.
there's some employers that are just like, they just couldn't wait to drag everyone back in the office. And it made no sense to do so.
No.
The productivity went down, creativity went down. It didn't do anything to help support the worker. So again, I like these arguments where, some folks might be like, oh, it's laziness. That's what it is. And it's like, no, fuck that. It's not laziness. It's that we have to change the way that we do things so people are happy. You have a happy worker. It's like that whole happy wife, happy life.
Life,
Yeah,
yeah,
there
yeah.
you go.
Yeah.
Figure that solution out, and you're gonna get the best productivity out of the people that are working for you, working with you.
Right.
So I'm all
Yeah.
about, changing the way that we do things. We talk about like nursing retention, recruitment, these different things. The government start listening to us. So like we're gonna
Yeah.
get to a point where we gotta be
We
doing
gotta
some
make the
crazy
change.
stuff
Yeah.
to
And
make
Yeah.
yeah,
change.
this is one thing that I think is a bit of a paradox. So in our jobs, whatever job you have a certain level of responsibility. In
Yeah.
fact, nurses have a very high level of responsibility. So why are we being treated like children? Why are we being micromanaged, right? Like why I remember in a past job that Amie and I had, it got to the point where literally we were being told how to write email subject lines.
Wow.
This is how you need to write it. This is how you need to name a document because I don't like how you name it. It's like we are in leadership positions, we are nurses, and we're being treated like children. And literally, someone is standing over our shoulder to make sure we do things that they want, like the way that
Right.
they want it. Because there's more than one way to do a job,
Yeah.
right?
The best experience I ever had with an employer was I had a leader who looked at me and was like, if you need help, let me know. Go get it. Get it
Yeah, yeah,
done.
yeah,
I
yeah.
hired
I'm here
you.
as a
You
resource
got
to you.
you got the resources. You need something extra. You come to me. I'll help you with it. And I was like, dope. Now
That's a
and
breath of
it was
fresh
like the
air.
best relationship because I was able to do what I was hired to do. And then when I didn't have the tools or I needed some more support, then I was able to knock on his door and he's like, all right, let's figure this out together. But he wasn't like standing over my shoulder to make sure I was getting things done. He knew and looked at my qualifications. It was like, okay, that's what I hired you for. Go,
Yeah.
and gave me that ability to feel free to do the work that I was able to do. And I think that's what we definitely need in a variety of things, not even just within the workplace, like within relationships in general. You got to be able to, you know, be able to give people trust and give people the rope and hope that people will do the right thing.
Absolutely. I could not agree more. And in fact, Amie, we have a mutual contact. I'm not sure how well you know
We
her.
do.
Lisa Arneson.
Oh, we do. Yes, we do.
How do
It's
you know Lisa?
wild. How does that like I think I've connected with so many different
Yeah,
people
yeah.
through social media. It's just it's wild. I
It's
didn't
just like a
know.
ether connection. I have many of those too. And Lisa was actually one of my first bosses, and she took a
That's
very similar
crazy.
approach to what you described to your this fantastic light triad boss that you had. Lisa was the same with me. She and it was so jarring because I went from the military where it was so inverted. I mean, there was such a
Right.
clear hierarchy there that was anchored in something called the dark core of personality. And the dark core of personality is described as the tendency to maximize individual utility while accepting, neglecting, or provoking the disutility of others. Just
Right.
to summarize that, that's think of a Disney villain. It's like, I need to protect what's important to me, and I'm going to suppress and stamp on anybody else who gets in the way. That's
Yeah.
essentially the distillation of that concept. Lisa did the exact opposite. She said, you're going to make yourself obsolete in this job, and I'm going to empower you to do that. And it was a riddle at first because I was in an economically precarious situation. I wanted to hold on to my job, but she, along with another boss at the time, Alan Grant, clarified that making myself obsolete is not the same as making myself irrelevant. If anything, it is
Right.
the full empowerment of me as an employee to rise up, to become a leader, to replicate positive leadership behaviors and inspire a culture. And it was fantastic because here I went from literally people barking orders in my face to Lisa saying, if you're not hearing from me, it's a good thing. And I was
Mm-hmm.
like,
Right.
this doesn't
Right.
make any sense. And I was like, if I ever needed help, though, her door was open. She was
Yep.
very responsive via email, via phone, would always check in on me and ask me, how am I really doing? But for the
Right.
most part, got out of my way and just trusted me to get the job done. And this was in the early 2000s. That was revolutionary then. It's
Yeah.
revolutionary even now
Mm-hmm.
because, to your point, leaders are insisting that their people come back into the office for some knowledge work jobs when they were
Right.
clearly demonstrating during the throes of the pandemic that they could work from home, be just as productive. And the perception gaps that are now growing between employee and employer, to me, are the smoking gun. And what we're seeing, and in this discussion that we've been having, we've been talking about the experience of the employee, but against the, the invisible force that has been oppressing the employee, for lack of a better word, has been bad leaders. Um, and I don't believe that there's a mustache twirling Disney villain at the top of this. I don't believe that there is a secret cabal of people meeting in closed doors saying, how do we make workers' lives miserable? I
Right.
think what's happening, unfortunately, is a symptom of the Peter Principle. The Peter Principle describes how people are promoted to positions of leadership. What happens is change is happening in an organization, and somebody says, hey, Sarah, hey, Hamza, hey, Amy, you look like a leader based on what we know the leader paragon template looks like. You
Right.
have leader-like behavior outwardly. You're speaking with confidence. You're standing tall. Therefore, you might have the ability to lead other people. Join the echelons of management, and now use a set of skills that A, you probably weren't born with, or B, you've never been formally trained on.
Right.
People
Hmm.
skills,
Yeah.
human skills, and lead people just like you, and we're floundering. And every iteration of this gets weaker and weaker and weaker, to the point where disengagement has become an inevitable consequence of a lack of intention and thoughtfulness and care and love in the leadership development value chain, if you will. I know that was a
Right.
lot over there, but I think it's best reflected in this one stat over here that I think Microsoft put together, and that was the perception of productivity in a remote environment. I think when they surveyed approximately 38,000 employees, they found that 88% of employees felt like they could be trusted to work independently and remotely, but only 12% of their leaders actually agreed with that sentiment. And that to me is like, ah, oh, my goodness. How is
Mhm.
this happening in 2024? How are we still this distrustful of one another?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that again, like there's so much work that needs to go, and so many conversations that need to be had to change some of the dialogue that's happening right now within, whether it's in a workplace, whether it's in a political situation. There's just so much that needs to be done. I think that the conversation has been so rich, and I know we're running out of time, so we have two last questions. I'll let Sarah go with her question, and then I'll ask the final question. But again, it's been
Mhm.
a pleasure speaking with you, Sarah. Take it away.
Yeah. So just back to what you said about leaders, what happens in nursing, going back to how we're really focused on seniority, is you mentioned that, oh, if you show leadership like qualities, you might get promoted to leaders. Well, in nursing, it's like, well, you've been a nurse for X number of years, let's say 5 years. Okay, you should be a charge nurse now. Okay, you've been in nursing for 10 years. You should be in management now. That's usually how it works, right? And we're just as ill equipped as anyone else to lead.
Right.
And I feel like this really contributes to toxic work environments because,
Mhm.
in my experience, the most toxic leaders that I've had the unfortunate luck of having, not only have they stayed in their positions, some have even moved up.
Yeah.
And I think this is really just symptomatic of how organizations deal with toxicity. So they don't address it, right? Because either they're afraid of them, or maybe on some level, these leaders are contributing positively to the bottom line, but at the expense of the staff.
Mhm.
And so my question to you is, what are some concrete steps that leaders can take? And leaders, I mean senior leaders, when there
Yes.
is someone who is showing toxic behaviors, and that's really just playing itself out in the organization.
Wow. What a question. And I'm not sure, we haven't had a chance to discuss this, but this is a big focus of my next book. It's on workplace nightmares. It's taking this idea of bad bosses in the workplace and really putting a engaging spin on it by turning them into monster and ghost stories. In the Halloween episode,
Oh my
you
goodness.
you both contended with, like, are ghosts real? Your guest said that, are ghosts real? And it depends on who you ask. The answer could be yes, the answer could be no. But one thing we can all agree on is that monster managers are very real. So ghosts might
Very
not be real,
true.
but monster
Mhm.
managers are real. And what needs to happen is more conversations like this. We have to first elevate the level of consciousness to be able to better detect toxic leadership behavior. I think everybody perceives what a toxic leader is based on our popular imagination, based on culture, based on, The Devil Wears Prada and the latest Netflix
Right.
HBO show that we're watching. But the behaviors are actually a lot more subtle, and they happen over time. And, I was last year, I've become better at sharing the story, but I was diagnosed with CPTSD, complex post-traumatic stress disorder,
Mm,
which, when I received the diagnosis, I'm like, that's impossible. How did this happen in the workplace? Why am I so, and what triggered is that every time I speak, especially to an audience about a topic that is quite traumatizing for me. I'm re-traumatizing myself in a way that I experienced over a sustained 1.5, 2 year period working under a monster manager.
Right.
Now, one of the strategies of a bad boss and a toxic leader is isolation. And so they gaslight you, they make you feel like you're experiencing this on your own and that it's just you. And then you don't
Yep.
actually have the
Yeah.
language, the nuance, the sophistication to communicate this with anybody, especially in smaller work environments where the networks are strong and you're worried about repercussions and rumors being spread.
Right.
So the first thing I will say is that we need to normalize conversations like the one that we're having right now. It's fantastic that the three of us are speaking about this, but I would love for every organization to have this level of candor when it comes to bad bosses. People should be encouraged to have these conversations. And so the concrete step that I would recommend, I want to give you like 15 million different ideas here, but I think the most helpful thing would be this one: for leaders to engender psychological safety in the culture by having regular one-on-ones with their people. And I run into this all the time, especially with nurses and especially in the healthcare profession, is that people have too many direct reports. I met a
Yeah.
nurse
Yes.
working at Unity Health. I shouldn't have put them on blast like this, but I've already said this. I met a nurse who worked at Unity Health who had 70 direct reports, 70.
Crazy.
And I
It's
fell out of my
unreal.
chair. I was like, that is inhuman.
That's not unheard of. I've heard of as high as 300 or 400.
It's nuts. You can't. I mean, the Dunbar number caps out at 150. You can only actually care about 150 people. How are you supposed to care
Right.
about 300 people? At that point, dehumanization is rampant, despite people's best efforts. Like, leaders just don't have the ability to process that much information. So, number one, advocate for better resources if you're in that situation. And secondly, in these one-on-ones, really make it about the other person. Ask them, how are you doing? How are you really doing? What's getting in
Right.
the way of you doing your best work? What do you need in order to thrive and succeed? And reiterate the thing that Amie, your boss, reiterated to you, and that Lisa reiterated to me, which is, I'm here. My job is to help you. My job is to help you grow. It's not to protect myself. It's not to level up at your expense. My job, as counterintuitive as this is to make myself obsolete so that you can step in and you can step up. And I would
Right.
love to see that hierarchy be inverted with these individual conversations. So that would be my recommendation to leaders. Adopt a position of, just be a giver of light, as metaphysical as that sounds. Your job is to create more leaders. It's not to create a better leadership situation for yourself.
Yeah, no, I think that exactly is what I think people need to hear. Again, we do need to continue to have this conversation to talk about toxic bosses. Like I think when Sarah and I first started the podcast and kind of brought this to the forefront, it was very surprising for people to hear because again, work in a very hierarchical situation where this is how and this is who you can talk to, and we just said F that. We wanted to flip it on our heads and say, that there shouldn't be a hierarchy. We have the ability to speak and we should speak, especially if there's violence that's happening towards the
Mm-hmm.
workers. And again, I think that, we always talk about that, in the moment, sometimes that's probably when you have to be the most disruptive, when that person is
Yes.
yelling, for example. Like it's crazy that you would even think that in a healthcare situation that you might be, with a physician or whatever, and you're getting yelled at. Like
Literally
what
yelled
is
at.
like what
Yeah.
kind of behavior is that? That in these moments, these things are happening. We have to stop them and we have to be like, you know what? Would you talk to your dog that way? Like you wouldn't even talk to an animal that way, but you're talking to me, another human individual, like I'm nobody. And we
Mm-hmm.
have to start having those conversations because these types of like awful workplace situations happen way more often than we would like to know, and they
Yeah.
shouldn't happen whatsoever. So again, I'm glad that we're having the conversation and I hope we can make some changes, and I'm looking forward to hearing what you'll be writing about in terms of monster bosses, because they're out
Oh,
there.
yeah.
They are most definitely out there and we need to call them out. We need to call out the bad actors, absolutely.
And you've inspired some thoughts on that actually. Coming into this podcast, I was like, you know what? I've been looking for these stories because I need to map out these stories onto the 9 dark core traits. So there's like 9 traits that toxic leaders exhibit: sadism, moral disengagement, psychopathy, so on and so forth. And I've been thinking about like just finding interesting stories, but in hearing especially ooh, I mean one of the episodes that you published that I think is probably my favorite. It was such a juxtaposition because it was about the TikTok nurse,
Oh,
Oh,
and then
yeah.
it right away, like the contrast into the nurse in Boston who drove her car off the parking lot. I was like,
yeah.
wow, my goodness, what a journey you took the listeners on. And for me, that really helped me crystallize an idea, which is I need to focus in this book on specific industries that are more vulnerable than others. And nursing, by far, is the most vulnerable to bad bosses because of the industrialized nature of
Yeah.
healthcare, especially in the United States. Don't even get me started on that. And because it is so devalued as a result of events that have transpired over these last 4 years. But I also think that it has its roots at a time when some of the most dehumanizing workplace practices were alive and well. I mean, the nursing profession is one of the oldest, and it passed through the filter of slavery. Let's just call it what it is, right? It went through the great man theory of leadership. It passed through that. It passed through worker suppression that happened and, came to a head in the 1886 Haymarket Affair. And the biggest labor law that was passed in the United States happened in 1938. In 1938 is when we outlawed child slavery. What the hell
Mm,
were we doing before then? 1938 is one human being ago. So
right.
all of this is to say what we're doing, this conversation right now, as normal as this is to us, is so revolutionary in the wide scheme of time because we're slamming the brakes on a car that's been going 200 kilometers an hour in one direction, which is profit over all else. And so what we're advocating for over here is put people first. And
Yep.
that might seem pedestrian and trite to people, but I promise you it is so revolutionary in the grand scheme of things.
I'm here with you. Like we
100%.
are 100%.
100%.
So we're gonna take one more question. This is, I think we've talked about so many great different things today and so many things about the workplace, the community, but I want to bring it back down to talking about people. And I think it's going to be a challenging question, but it's an important question that I think that we need to have, particularly like kind of wrapping up the end of the year too. We've talked about a lot of different things, and I think the word itself, polarization, is something that we're starting to hear a little bit more. We're seeing, that society as a whole, there's a little bit of civil unrest. People aren't as nice as they used to be to one another as we were before, and we're seeing this kind of increasing polarizations that's spilling over into workplaces, including healthcare. How can we, foster collaboration? How can we bring back that culture of compassion and respect in teams when people are so divided? There's so much divide
Yeah.
right now, right? How do we bring people back to being more compassionate?
Wow. Thank you for this question. I sincerely, you, and I'm so glad that we're engaging with this at the end of the year because I'm feeling a change in me. We crossed paths at the CMHA conference, and
Yep.
shortly after that, I spoke at the CAEH conference, so Canadian
Yep.
Mental Health Association. Immediately after that, I spoke at the Canadian Alliance to End Homelessness, and that, as a nexus point for me, was powerful because being with those two communities that are truly at the front line, that are experiencing the worst downstream effects of upstream dehumanization, it
Mm-hmm.
really encouraged me to stop playing small ball. I think that especially in corporate environments, I get up on stage and I feel like I have a responsibility to, educate, to inform, to inspire,
Right.
but I often hold back my sort of revolutionary spirit. And thank you both for giving me the platform, for creating a space for this to happen. Two things I would say. Number one, go back and listen to the episode of this podcast with Jagmeet Singh. Um, and listen to the topics that were covered, specifically about reproductive rights, specifically about the rollbacks of Roe v. Wade, specifically about Canadian politicians who are taking some very problematic stances, making decisions for people instead of with people. So that would be it. So if anybody's on the fence about the premise of Amie's question and Sarah's question, listen to that episode and really just connect with the fact that in 2024, at the time of this recording, there are, and I'm just going to say it, there are men who believe that they have the ordained right, whether that is divinely ordained or through the institutions to which they're attached, to make decisions about women. And that to me
Right.
is like, I don't know how much more we need to speak about dehumanization because that's happening right now.
Right.
Start
Mhm.
there. But the revolutionary request that I'm making of people is assume ignorance before malevolence. So when you listen to that episode and you get mad, I think it's just human nature to be like, man, Pierre Poilievre, terrible human being.
Right.
Sit with that emotion and then roll that back and say, okay, if we assume ignorance before malevolence, and then we think about all of the topics that we covered on this podcast, the great man theory of leadership, and it's now coming back to me, the name that I forgot a couple of minutes ago, Taylorism. Frederick
Okay.
Winslow Taylor, who advocated there's one best way to get something done because he was trying to make money with Henry Ford at the time.
Ah,
Um, you think about just the history that we have passed through to get to this moment that is entrenched in the idea that people are lazy, unmotivated, people are incapable of making decisions for themselves and realizing purpose without guidance. I mean, full circle moment back to how this conversation started about experiencing suppression in the military and then transitioning into a speaker. If we start from the place of people are just following an echo, they're following a cycle, they're following a blueprint that was laid out by people who didn't have their best interests at heart.
mm,
That then gives us the permission to change the conversation entirely. And the conversation then becomes, here's what I need. What do you need? Let's just have a frank conversation about what we both need as human beings. And let's find a yes and solution. Let's find a work together solution. I know that this sounds very utopian. This sounds a little bit woo woo over here, but truly, this is the crux of the problem. If we just stop making decisions for people and start making decisions with them,
with
if we stop
people.
leading
Yeah.
over people and start leading through them, that is how I truly believe we can start to change the course of history. We can break free from this pattern, the status quo, to borrow a specific bar from Sarah in the opening. The status quo is dehumanizing, and the way that we break free from the status quo is we just do that. We just start breaking free from it. And the revolutionary thing to do is to ask, what do you need and how can I help you?
Yeah. It's kind of like that whole aspect of sometimes we do too much talking and not nearly enough listening. And I think that there's a lot of frustrated people out there, and we need to start listening. We need
Yeah,
to really
yeah.
start listening to what's happening. And I think that I know there's a lot of concerns going into 2025, and I think that people, we're going to have conversations across the board and be able to bring people together. I think you know being able to I think it's fine for people to disagree. I think if we lived in a world where everyone agreed with everyone, we'd be in a very boring state, and it'd be not very engaging. So I do feel that people should have the right to disagree on different things, but I also believe that we should have the right to be able to have an opinion and be able to voice that respectfully, and then also just be able to say, okay, yeah, cool, I don't agree with you, without it being without violence
Right,
occurring.
right.
So again,
Wow.
I think that there's so much work, so much that we can learn from each other, and that we're going to continue to have the conversation. I know that you're going to continue to have the conversation, husbands, as
Yeah.
well. And that's the work of the Greeners podcast, that we're going to continue facilitating conversations. We're going to continue to push the envelope. We're going to continue to engage with folks who might not even want to engage with us. We don't care. Polyev, we're still waiting. We haven't heard
Yeah,
from
yeah, yeah.
you. We've heard from everyone else. Where are you? Anyhow,
Polyev, it would be
but
in your
yeah,
best
just
interest, honestly, Polyev, to chat with Sarah and Amie. I truly believe that because Amie, you said it. I couldn't have said it better. Um, it's not about having all of the answers. It's about asking the right questions. And I don't think that
100%.
there's any politician, current or forthcoming, that is capable of doing that. I
Yeah.
truly think that and I'm a bit extreme in this. I truly believe that one person being able to make decisions on behalf of everybody else is an outdated idea. That
Absolutely.
concept
Yep.
is completely
Yeah.
dead. What I would
Yep.
love to see, and I'm just going to throw this out there, is I would love to see you've already brushed shoulders with the Prime Minister of Canada. I mean, you are in the echelon of power. I mean, I would love to see a model of leadership where it's Sarah and Amie that are leading the country. And
Shared
I
power
mean that.
And
model.
Amy and I were
Shared
actually
power
saying
model,
we've had
100%.
every other leader of every other political party
We've had
in
Green,
Canada already on the
NDP,
podcast. So we're just
Liberal.
waiting
So
for
we're
blue
just waiting. We're
now.
just waiting for the CBC. Whenever they're ready, we're ready to have a
Yeah,
conversation.
you have my vote, man. I'm telling you.
So Hamza, thank you so much for coming on today. I'm sure we could have gone for several more hours, and we'd love to have you on again.
Absolutely.
Hopefully, folks listening today can research some of the things that you touched upon and leave feeling inspired and ready for what's to come.
Thank you. Thank you so much. What a pleasure and privilege.
Where can people find you, Hamza?
Yes, hamzakhan.ca. No matter where I am in the world, I'm keeping that .ca. I'm representing for the place that made me. Hamzakhan.ca. That's HAMZAKHAN. And if you are a US listener, HAMZAKHAN.ca.
Amazing. Thank you so much for listening to the Gritty Nurse podcast. Until next time, thanks so much.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to the Gritty Nurse podcast. If you have any suggestions or want to hear a specific topic, email us at grittynurses@gmail.com. That's grittynurses@gmail.com.
We are also speakers and authors available for engagements related to advocacy, nursing, mental health, and health policy. Please connect with us.
We want to take a moment to express our deepest gratitude to our incredible sponsors. Their generous support has been instrumental in making our podcast a reality.
Thanks to their belief in our mission, we're able to bring you engaging content and connect with our amazing community. We're truly grateful for your partnership. Thank you.